Hello everyone. Today I want to talk about how pop performances have really changed over the years. And of course, the reason I'm doing this is because of the recent Coachella performances that we had. Something that of course really struck not just me, but everyone else I think was the comparison of Justin Bieber and Sabrina Carpenter's performances at Coachella and the vast, not just difference in performance, but hence also how people perceived the performances and how people almost hence made a judgment on the artist based on just that performance. And honestly, I understood why people were comparing the performances because they were so vastly different. But I think that the comparison itself is a lot more interesting than the potential outcome of that comparison. And so that's what I want to look at today. Now, before we get into it, please do think about subscribing to my channel and liking this video. It really, really helps me out. I'm trying to build this out as much as I can. And I've got videos basically twice a week on Wednesdays and Fridays. So there's always something for you to watch. But all that aside, let's get into it. I actually enjoyed both performances. From everything that I saw and that was written about the performances, Bieber's set was a lot more stripped back, maybe something some people would call more intimate, more centered around his voice and his presence. And Sabrina's was a more huge theatrical pop production, costume, visuals, choreography, staging, interludes, lots of guest performances. And as someone who loves dance, I love performance, I love a proper stage show, I love a proper pop show, that kind of thing feels like it's naturally going to appeal to me a lot. I love when pop feels like pop. I love choreography. I love a set that feels designed. So I loved that performance, but I also really enjoyed Bieber's. And so the reason the comparison really stuck in my mind is because I think this year specifically, it really highlights that artists aren't being judged in the same way or by the same measurements at all anymore. It's not just enough for a lot of people to go onto the stage and perform your songs. More and more artists are being asked to build something bigger around the performance. It has to become a clip, a moment, the visual language, a talking point, a thing that people want to repost afterwards to prove that it mattered and to prove that it's good. It has to survive just the kind of area that it's in while it's being performed. It has to go beyond that. And of course, there's a huge gendered layer to all of this. Now, I won't go into this too much because I think there are a lot of really fantastic videos and articles that talk about the kind of divide between gender and how we hence judge performances, but I will touch on it a little bit. Female pop stars are very often and more often expected to produce visible labor on stage in order to be read as giving enough and being enough and almost being allowed to be on the stage.
The double standard in pop music between male performers and female performers has probably never been clearer comparing Sabrina Carpenter and Justin Bieber's headline sets at Coachella this weekend. Friday night, Sabrina Carpenter delivered probably the best show of her career. Full cinematic opening sequence, you have dancers dressed as dogs, you have vintage cars, one of which turns into a water fountain. Comparing that to Justin Bieber's set, which featured him in a hoodie and sunglasses on stage, no dancers, he didn't play any instruments, it was just him, a MacBook Pro laptop, and YouTube. So if Sabrina Carpenter had come out and done exactly what Bieber did, would she be getting the same kind of praise that he is? Absolutely not. She would be eviscerated, likely canceled because of how lazy and uninspired it was.
They're expected to choreograph, aestheticize, stylize, and conceptualize world building and hence prove their ambition. We see a lot with Zara Larsson, right? People saying, oh, she's proving she's ambitious, she's proving that she wants this, as if the fact that she's been doing this since she was 8 or something isn't enough that she clearly loves music and wants to do it full time. And so we see it here. A lot of people were really upset about people saying that Bieber's set was better just because it maybe felt more intimate versus Sabrina, who clearly had put so much work into the performance. And so of course the question also arises, does effort and spectacle equal good? And I don't think that's a question I will attempt to answer. I don't think it's a question that should even exist in the first place. And men, of course, absolutely face pressure too, but women in pop are a lot more likely to be asked where the concept was, where the visuals were, where was the dancing. Look at Taylor Swift, people are like, oh, she can't even dance. And I'm like, the girl's not a dancer, but she's dancing on stage, she's having fun, she's going along with her dancers. Why is that an issue? Why does she suddenly have to be a trained dancer to be allowed into the arena? And of course, where was the moment? Where was something huge and something legible? So this video is not going to be about who had the better Coachella set. I don't think that's an interesting discussion to have. It's about why pop stars don't seem to just be able to perform anymore. Why do they seem like they have to launch moments? And I want to talk about when that happened, why it happened, and why I think audiences now are so good at feeling the difference between a moment that just genuinely erupted and a moment that was clearly built to erupt and cause momentum. So before I go any further, I think it's helpful to define what, in my opinion, is a performance versus a moment, because they're not the same thing, even if at times I think we start to treat them like they are. A performance exists primarily in the room. It might be a massive, minimal, theatrical, raw, emotional, slick, messy, whatever, but its main job is still to work live. A moment is different. A moment is built to travel outside of those boundaries. It's designed to leave a trace on pop culture, become clips, screenshots, fan edits, think pieces, memes, reactions, videos, discourse. It basically needs to have a second life almost immediately after the performance, maybe even during the performance. And I think one of the easiest ways to explain that difference is actually maybe through Sabrina Carpenter herself, because I think she has clear examples of both. If you look at the whole rise of the nonsense outros, that felt much closer to a performance being a moment naturally. She was doing those live, changing them city by city, playing with the room, and people loved them because they felt really spontaneous, cheeky, maybe a little bit chaotic, and genuinely also tied to the performance itself and felt natural to who Sabrina Carpenter is and who her onstage persona is. Of course, there was a reason why she did those. She knew her audience would like it. She knew it was fun to do, but I don't think it was done with the intent to become a viral clip, because it started to just happen organically at a certain point. That didn't happen as soon as she started doing them.
If she wants some cake, I got a bake shop. You be getting off like it's a train stop. It goes without saying that I bank up.
And so it felt like a moment that emerged from people actually enjoying the performance itself and enjoying what she was just naturally already doing on stage. Now, if we compare that to her 2026 Coachella set, that wasn't just a performance or a little thing in the performance that people enjoyed. That was a full-scale pop event. And of course, it was designed to be a visual spectacle, to be clippable, to be able to discuss about straight away, and to carry an entire world around it, which is something that makes it really, really fun, of course. It was still a performance, and of course, by all accounts, in my opinion, a very, very strong one. But it was doing a lot of jobs at the same time. It wasn't just happening. It was also arriving with an afterlife already built into the performance itself. They knew that this was going to become clippable. They knew that bringing Madonna on set was going to create a moment. So you just see the difference in approach. Again, I'm not saying one is better or worse, but I hope you're starting to see the difference between these two. And so that's the distinction that I'll keep coming back to throughout this whole conversation. Some things become moments because audiences just happen to latch onto them. I think sometimes we see this with fan chants in pop culture as well. If you look at Cat's Eye, when they do Gnarly and they say, "Jealous of my mansion," and the whole audience goes, "Yes!" That's just because we all thought the way Lara said yes in interviews was really funny. It wasn't something that was curated at all. But other things arrive knowing that they need to be a moment. And that doesn't mean that the second kind is fake, but it just means it lands differently, because one feels like emergence while the other can feel a little bit more like deployment. But then, of course, I think it's worth zooming out for a minute, because this didn't start with Coachella. This also, I don't think, started with TikTok. Before social media, pop performance was obviously still very mediated. Artists had music videos, award shows, slots, interviews, radio, magazine covers, tabloid coverage, paparazzi everywhere. Pop was never some pure, untouched space. But the relationship between song and performance was, I think, a lot more linear. You released the music, you promoted it, maybe you had a huge TV performance, maybe there was a scandal or a breakout moment, but a performance didn't have to constantly feed this rolling machine of clips and audience participation in order to prove its value. You really just had to be able to sing the song well, have a fun performance that was fun to watch in the moment, and that was kind of it. Then social media comes in and it starts to shift the scale of circulation completely. Suddenly, performances are not just watched and then reviewed later. They are chopped up, shared instantly, judged in little fragments, replayed, memified, recontextualized. And at that point, the artist isn't just performing to the people in the room, but they're now performing for this potential wider audience. They're performing for the clip. And then TikTok, of course, took it a step further, because now it's not just about whether the song can circulate online through YouTube, for example. It's about whether the song contains like a usable unit of participation that extends beyond that initial audience. A dance, a hook, a facial expression, a snippet, a sound, a 10-second piece that people can repeat and make their own and relate to. TikTok's own impact research and Luminate reporting around it make it very clear that the platform became a major driver of discovery of music, chart performance, and fan conversion. So it wasn't just like about building a pop culture moment. It became industrial. The whole business started learning from how to release music on TikTok. And of course, one of the clearest and cleanest examples of that is Say So by Doja Cat. Say So didn't just become a hit because it was catchy, don't get me wrong, it was very catchy, but that wasn't the only reason. It became a hit because it fit perfectly into that emerging logic of TikTok dance culture, and the Hailey Sharp dance became one of the key vehicles for that. And that's really important to take note of, because once the industry saw that happen, it stopped just noticing TikTok after the fact. It started thinking through TikTok from a promotional aspect, for example, but I think also from an aspect of how do we create a song? The song now maybe needed to have a bit more of a hook that someone else could hopefully also make a little dance to, and then loads of people do it and the song starts charting. And I really think that after that, you can feel the ripple effect. Not necessarily songs that sound exactly like Say So, but I think that more and more songs were being built that were built, pushed, or understood through the same logic of the hit of Say So. Tracks that lend themselves to choreography, repeatable moments, or quick hooks and easy participation, and of course, instant visual recognition. The point is not that everyone literally copied the song. The point is that the industry learned the lesson. But when I do think about songs that felt like they were a similar moment, we've got things like Savage, Savage Love, Lottery, etc. So we saw quite an emergence of a specific type of song. And then for me, I think we hit the next phase of this, which is where this stops being a useful tool and starts becoming an actual requirement for releasing music. Because there's a huge difference between artists benefiting from viral culture and artists being told that they basically can't move forward in their career without proving that they can produce virality first. That's why the Halsey situation mattered to a lot of people. When Halsey said that their label wouldn't let them release a song unless they could make a viral moment on TikTok first, that felt like one of those moments where the curtain behind song production and release kind of slipped. And of course, we'd heard before of artists not being pushed appropriately by their labels, but I think it was one of the first instances where we saw it specifically relating to virality on a social media platform like TikTok. Suddenly, it wasn't just fans speculating that labels just weren't pushing their artists or just didn't care about their artists enough. And it was also the end of us speculating that maybe they cared too much about social media. It was, now we knew that is really what happens. Artists were openly saying that the moment itself had become part of the release gate, and once that happens, a song itself isn't enough. The artists themselves isn't enough. Their style isn't. You now need proof in advance that something can become content and feed the content clip farming machine. And that is, I think, such a huge shift in not just pop performance, but unfortunately in pop releases and just how the entire industry works. And so this is where the internet also started forming its own kind of shorthand, right? So we started seeing things like the Kia Asylum conversation, which isn't about mocking female artists, I don't think. I personally don't see it like that. Some people might, but I see it more as a lot of the time acknowledging that artists are trapped by labels, by bad rollout decisions, by stalled momentum, and by the inability to break back through all of that, and hence the need for a viral moment. And of course, we've seen some artists like BB Rexa and I think Ava Max leaning into this narrative now as well, and trying to even use that term to break out and have like a viral moment by seeming up to date with internet culture. But what it tells you even more is that culture has developed like its own entire vocabulary for what it means to be stranded outside of the moment economy. And women are often the ones that we talk about the most in those terms. When we look at the Kia Asylum, it's mostly women. I don't know if there's any men that are kind of widely agreed to be in there as well, we mostly talk about female pop stars. And why is that? Again, it goes back to my first point that female pop stars are expected to evolve and change their look and have viral moments a lot more often than men. And so by this point, the shift really has hardened, right? Virality is no longer like a bonus point for you. It's basically a permission that you need before you're even allowed to get onto the stage and into the world of the industry. And that brings me, of course, all the way back to Coachella 2026, because I think Coachella 2026 works as a prime example of seeing that the shift is no longer subtle. At this point, Coachella isn't just about the performances anymore. While for me, it's something I really look forward to, it's obviously a lot bigger than that. It's about surprise guests, brand activations, merch, of course, massive creator content, fashion, discourse clips, and all of the different layers of visibility that now sit on top of the music itself. Forbes counted, I believe, about 92 surprise guests this year alone, and Vogue described a big brand renaissance for Coachella. And then The Independent reported that creator output around the festival itself is often planned weeks or even months in advance. And of course, we see that now through kind of all of the TikToks that come out of it. The vibe of Coachella has changed massively, right? And you see that in how the fashion has evolved for it, but you also see it in the content that's coming out of it. And that's why Coachella feels like a useful talking point, because it's more than just a music festival at this point, but it's like a convergence of a bunch of things that are defining this constant shift in pop culture. We've got performance, branding, nostalgia, internet culture, influencer planning, retail, press, and fandoms that all meet there at once. It's basically like a huge convention at this point rather than a music festival. I'm sure there are a lot of people that go to Coachella in the hopes of running into specific social media influencers or hoping to run into other artists who are watching the stages as well at the same time. It's more than just there's an artist I like, I want to go see them, and that person just performs for you. So when people say that pop stars don't just perform anymore, I think what they're reacting to is that the live event now just has to do all of these jobs at the same time. Sure, it has to entertain the people that are there, although that is then often criticized, and a lot of people say that the artists themselves are more focused on the part of the performance that's being televised and live streamed rather than the people that are actually there. But that's because it also still has to produce stills and clips and reaction cycles, fashion commentary, fan edits, and just a larger cultural life after the fact. And so I think that once that becomes the expectation, which it realistically is at this point, audiences become quite good at sensing when a performance isn't just a performance anymore, and they can feel the optimization of the staging. And so that's what I want to look at now, because some moments feel organic, even when they later become huge culture moments, but others feel visibly manufactured, even when they're technically successful. And I think a really good example of this, maybe a bit of a sideshow, but is the Wicked press tour. The 2024 Wicked press tour became its own cultural moment and object. People were obsessed with it, with all the weirdness and the fantasticalness around it. It was emotional, theatrical, very memeable, and slightly surreal in a way that people, I think, genuinely wanted to keep watching. And I feel like they hadn't seen a press tour like that maybe in a little while. It spilled out beyond normal promotion. It became really entertaining in its own right. And I think that's why it worked. It didn't feel like people were instructed to care about it or care about the movie. They knew that they had a huge Wicked fandom. So I don't think they felt the need necessarily to attract a much wider audience than that. But the way that Ariana and Cynthia interacted with each other so naturally became really fun to watch. It felt like audiences grabbed onto something strange yet compelling and then just kind of ran with it. But then we have to compare it to the 2025 Wicked for Good promotion cycle. Very, very, very different. The chemistry between Ariana and Cynthia felt a lot less central to the promotion itself. They were less constantly visible together, and the discourse shifted a little bit more towards the machinery around the film, the tie-ins, the massive amount of partnerships. I mean, I think I talked about it in one of my other videos, how many products with their faces on it were created for the second press tour. Now, of course, we can talk about why I think they did that. I think they knew a little bit that the second half of the show, and hence the movie, has a bit less material that naturally people will gravitate towards. And so they probably felt the need to amp up the promotion more. But I think they massively misread the room into why the first promotion cycle was such a success. And it was that because it wasn't as manufactured. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like none of that is ever manufactured. Of course, they knew that certain things people would enjoy and would become fun clips on the internet, but I don't think they realized the extent of just Ariana and Cynthia's relationship, which is why it's so mind-boggling that they completely decentralized that for the second Wicked tour. But this is why it's so important, because it shows how difficult it is to recreate a viral moment once people know that you're trying to do that. And that's the whole issue. You can't just rebuild the exact same structure of a viral moment and expect people to feel the same way. And that is why I think something like Brat is such a huge contrast here. One of the reasons that the Apple dance and the whole Brat wave felt so alive was that it seemed, at least initially, to spread sideways. It felt like fan-led rather than institutionally managed by the label. Of course, the label then jumped onto it, don't get me wrong, but the initial rollout was very organic. People felt like they had found the viral moment, and so they participated in it, they played with it, and they all made it their own before it then hardened into this kind of fully legible pop culture package that then became Brat Summer. And I think that that emotional difference matters. And I haven't seen the Charli XCX movie about kind of this and where she plays herself, but where they talk about basically wanting to recreate Brat Summer. And I don't know if it's very good or not, but I think that what we're talking about today is what they were trying to explore with that. Audiences will react differently when they feel like they have found something and they have cultivated something and they've created a moment for the artist, versus when they feel like something has arrived for them to engage with and take in, and hence feeling like they should be responding to it in a certain way. And so I think that's where we've come to the center of this entire video. The issue is that pop culture has become very strategic. And while pop culture has in a way always been that, there's always been a manufacturedness around pop. The issue now is that the strategy is very, very visible, and audiences are literate enough to see it and to feel it. People know what a TikTok ready hook looks like and sounds like. They know what a surprise guest is supposed to trigger. They know what press tour clip farming is doing. And they know when a live performance has been designed as much for the kind of replay as for the room it's being performed in. And so they know what it looks like when a campaign is trying to reverse engineer a moment of virality and the relationship changes. Because now the audience isn't just reacting to the moment emotionally, they're reading the intention behind it. And so they're asking, did this become a moment just because people loved it so much, or because every part of it was arranged to make sure we talked about it and felt a certain way? And that's why a lot of pop culture now feels staged. And so if we look at Bieber's performance of him singing his old songs again, there was a lot of discourse there of, is this because they knew that we would love that and it's the nostalgia baiting, right, of it? Or was it just a way for Bieber to reconnect with his own music in a way that he hasn't done for a long time and felt good for him to do? But I think because he did it in such a stripped back way, it felt more authentic and less like something they did to create a moment. Although, of course, the label knew it would create a moment. And so you're starting to see the difference, right? And so all of this discourse around it is not because pop has become talentless or because no one is making brilliant work anymore or because the staging itself is bad, but just because so much of contemporary pop now arrives pre-packaged and pre-adapted for wider circulation. And so before I end the video, I want to be really, really clear about that, because I don't believe that artists don't perform anymore. They absolutely do. Sabrina performs, Bieber performs, Beyonce performs, Doja performs, Charli performs. Choreography is not the problem. Spectacle is also not the problem. Neither is big staging. Some of the greatest pop performances are intensely constructed and structured in a certain way to work. The problem, if there is one, is that sometimes performance is just not allowed to remain performance. It has to function as the clip engine, a discourse object, a visual identity, a cultural mood board, a branding vehicle, and something to prove relevance of the artist afterwards. And again, I do think that women carry this burden in pop a lot more visibly than the men. They're much more often expected to make ambition legible for an audience through staging and visuals and choreography, and of course, most important of all, reinvention. Men can much more easily frame minimalization as seriousness or vulnerability, but women are required to prove at scale. So this is by no means a plea for less performance. I love a good performance. I love it. It's really just a question about whether we can still discern the difference between a moment that emerged and a moment that was deployed onto its audience. Because I think we can. And that is exactly why some things feel electric, while others feel overbuilt and over-engineered. So maybe the shift in pop culture is not that it's suddenly become fake. Pop has always been incredibly produced. Maybe the shift is just that the production is visible. The scaffolding is there, the audience is fluent in it, and performance is no longer enough just on its own. But what do you think? Have you noticed this shift? Do you feel like it happened actually a lot longer ago? Do you think pop has always been this manufactured to this extent, and it's just that now we're seeing the full kind of structured work behind it? As always, I hope you really enjoyed this video. I've got loads more on my channel, so please do check it out. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.